Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I must say that, of course, I would never be anywhere without C4C. And I think the reason I'm an entrepreneurial fellow is that I was the only person they could find in arts and sciences who had formed a company. But it may be that more have since then. But I did put this up just so you knew that I actually have done this. I find it a miracle myself, to be honest, because there is not a mistake that I can think of that anyone could make, except for maybe my next mistake, that I have not made. And so I'm going to talk to you about how I managed to end up with these companies that still exist, which is sort of a miraculous event if I say so myself, how I did it. And and a lot of the mistakes that I made, which I think are really the most useful kind of information to have, is sort of, because the mistakes I made, I think, would be a mistake for just about anybody. And so the companies that I have, the top is BRTC, Behavioral Research and Therapy Clinics. That it were a fundraising operation, but that is not a fundraising operation. And probably the major stress in my entire life is trying to keep an entire staff that I have there, which are research staff, some clinical staff, graduate students and all that, and keep everybody funded. So a huge amount of my life goes to just bringing money in. And for reasons that are not clear, I am not a person. People give millions of dollars, I'm not kidding, millions, to people who do my treatment in very expensive places. And I keep thinking, I'm the one who developed it. Maybe they could give me something, but they haven't, I'm not good at fundraising. That's going to be one of my points to you later. So what happened was I developed a treatment that not only is effective, but it's effective for a disorder that no one else was treating. Very high risk for suicide, individuals with multiple disorders. So at the time I was developing it, there simply wasn't a treatment out there. And indeed, this is considered now the state-of-the-art treatment. So the minute I developed it, people started wanting it. And the minute they started wanting it, I acted like any good faculty member would act. I went out and started giving talks for honoraria. And I started giving them, but they kept asking me to do more, so I told my graduate students who I had trained, and they were very good, and they could give good talks too. So I told all my grad students, you all go out and give talks, and they got honoraria, and suddenly one day it dawned on me that we had sort of a little company going in the middle of the University of Washington, and maybe there was a problem here, that we're not supposed to be running a company at the University of Washington. And so I decided that I would form a company. Now, I'm not sure that C4C existed at the time, and if it did, I had never heard of it. So I didn't talk to them. So I took my most senior graduate student, and we had another person who purported to be a business person who agreed that he would start a company with us, and that we would do it outside the university, and we would then give talks and training programs to all the people who wanted them in this company. So my graduate student, who had by this point in the game had just graduated, and I and this other person formed a company, and it was an LLC. It was called Behavioral Technology Transfer Group. Well, it had a better name then, but you'll find when you lose control, you often lose the name of your company also. So there's a little period in the middle where I lost control. But I've gotten it back, and I'll tell you how to do that. But I'm going to first tell you how not to lose control. But at any rate, it was Behavioral Technology Transfer Group, actually was the name of the company. And we started it and simply, really kept doing what we've been doing at the university, except we put the money into the company. Very quickly, the person who was supposed to be the business, who I guess had training in business anyway, immediately said that he should have a salary of $150,000. Now, that was more than we were making. So I said, we said, I'm sorry, none of us can have a salary like that. You can't have a salary of $150,000, at which point he walked straight out the door. So my graduate student and I were running it, so that meant that she was really running it, and I came and worked very closely with her. And that was a very reasonably good situation for quite a long time. What happened next was the University of Washington. I got permission all the time, by the way, for working at the company. So let me say, rule one, don't work outside the university without permission. So I always had permission. So then what happened next was the university changed their rules and said that I could work, that every phone call that I got from my former graduate students would be considered one day of work. And I said, what are you talking about? My students have to be able to talk to me. Well, I'm sorry. If they call you, it's a day of work. So I had to tell them they couldn't call me, but then if I went over there to talk to them, that was a day of work. And suddenly, I could no longer work for my own company to keep it going at the level that my students needed to be able to talk to me. So I said, all right, fine. If that's the rule, I couldn't talk them out of that rule. They don't have those rules anymore, by the way, but they did then. So I said, all right, I don't want to lose this company because it's valuable in what it does. So I'm going to give the company, I'm going to form a nonprofit and give 100% of my shares to the nonprofit. So the university said, I'll never forget, you'll never do that. And I said, you watch. So a week later, I had a nonprofit up and running. Well, maybe 2 weeks later, maybe 3. But anyway, as soon as one can, at which point I just transferred the whole company to the nonprofit, and that is Marie Institute. So Marie Institute then owned the company, and my former graduate student and I still ran the company. And just to give you a quick history, and I'm going to tell you all the mistakes not to make, what then happened was that the federal government and our lawyer had told us that if we did this, we would still be able to get small business grants from the federal government to do technology-based things. And I'm a big believer that psychotherapy ultimately is going to be done by machines in the future. No, that's hard to believe a psychologist would say it, but believe me, it's coming. And we want to be right at the beginning of that. So we were told, and we submitted a grant. The grant was giving us several $1 million, and we got the grant, except that it was going to council, which is where they make the final decision. And 2 weeks before that, we got a phone call saying, this is not a woman-owned business. You can't have the money. I said, what do you mean? We were told that we would be able to do this. Nope, it's not owned by a woman, it's owned by a nonprofit. You would get the grant if it were owned by a woman, but since it's not owned by a woman, you can't have the grant. So I said, oh, okay. So I formed another company, which is Behavioral Tech Research. Behavioral Tech Research is a company that develops technology-based training and interventions, and I own it. And I am a woman-owned business. This is a very good thing to be, as it turns out. It's got all kinds of benefits to it. So, and I simply took the company and gave all the grants from behavioral tech. I took those and transferred them all to behavioral tech research and behavioral tech research. They were none too happy to fund that, so we got a lot of funding over the years, but I'll tell you how that also fell apart. Okay, so Marie Institute, at some point in the game, we realized that one of the ways that we were effective at selling things was by selling my name, because I'm the person who developed the treatment. And I like Marie Institute because I could tell everyone in the world that it was named after all the Maries in the universe, living and dead. And it turns out there are loads of Maries around. So I still love that name the most. But we figured out that we might do better if we tried to fundraise in the future at giving it my name, since then it was hooked into my work. So that's how it got changed, Linehan Institute, which I'm not particularly happy about, but I do see it as a good business decision. And so now we have the Marie Division, which does a lot of the things I like doing, like retreats and things like that. Okay, so the name of this I got from C4C. So I'm going to talk about the stuff they told me to talk about, which is avoiding pitfalls, correcting mistakes, and managing 2 full-time jobs at the UW. So that's this. So the question is when and why to start a new company. I mean, there's no reason to start a company if you don't have to. So I tell people about being a researcher. No one's a researcher who could do something else, because it's much more work than anybody wants to do. And if you don't love it, I mean, if you're only a researcher because you just can't bear doing something else. So starting a company is sort of similar to that, you know, and the time to start a company is when you've developed something that people need outside the university, and that it would be good to get it to them. In other words, it's sort of a good for the world to get this stuff out there. And it could be that it's good for you to get it out there because it brings you money. So that might be a reason. That's not been a reason for me to get me to do this much work, but good for the world. And I think many of the products, I've gone to loads of these entrepreneurial meetings and heard the stuff people develop in the medical school and all other kinds of play and all these cool things they do, you know, where you can go on the bottom of boats and get rid of all sorts of bad things. So most of the stuff that people develop around here seems like it's really important that we get it out. I actually agree with the university's point of view that we need to do it. So that's the time to start thinking about doing a company. Now, C4C, I didn't work with them. I don't know that they had them when I started. This was a long time ago. But obviously, at that point, you work with you go to C4C. And my experience with C4C, just to let everybody know, if you haven't worked with them very much, is that they have been as much interested in my welfare as they are in the university's welfare. This is distinctly different than anything that happened before C4C came along, where I believe the university was primarily interested not in my welfare, not in the welfare of the people that needed my treatment, not in the welfare of me getting my things out there. They were interested in sort of the rules of the university. So now, I'm going to skip negotiating. Oh, I'm going to say then, of course, then you have to decide who owns what. Okay, so the issue is, do you own it or does the university own it? Okay. Now, if you own it, you're in great shape. So intellectual property, in other words, your scholarly work, in other words, your thinking or your thoughts are always owned by the person who thinks them. So I developed a treatment and developed something that's not, you can't patent, that no one else can own either, but I have a copyright to the writing of it, okay? That doesn't mean other people can't teach it, because now I have competitors all over the world teaching my treatment. And that's another problem we can discuss later. So you do have to figure out who owns what. But I have another thing, which is a research management program that I developed for my own clinic, because I wanted us to be able to use it without having to pay for it. And that suddenly looks like it could be very valuable to other people. And that's something that the university owns. And so I'm working with C4C to work out a deal where we could disseminate that, and I could get one of my companies to do a lot of the work so that they could own part of it, the UW would own part of it, and we would work together to disseminate it, to get it out, get money. So these are all things that, you know, you might as well just talk to C4C about it, because you're not going to win anyway. You know, even if you want to own something which they think they own, you'll lose. So you might as well talk to them. Now, the next biggest, this is just telling you my mistakes. If there's ever anything I would tell anybody, and I've told everyone who's come to talk to me, and a lot of people have, you know, come to see me individually, you have to pay exquisite attention to who owns the company. The single biggest mistake you're going to make is to give equal ownership to someone else just because you feel you should be a good person, or because you feel that somehow you work with them. But if in fact, and you have obviously have to be honest about this, but if in fact it is your own work and your own development, you really have to be careful. Okay. So what happened to me was, well, I didn't make this particular mistake. The ownership was I was the person who owned the company, and that was, you know, considered ethical. Other people got money, but they didn't own it. And, but I've seen a lot of other people who went out and tried to make ownership of a company equal with someone, or equal with the whole group. So let's say you develop something and you've got 4 people in your lab. And so the 4 people in your lab, you say, okay, we'll each be owners. And then the other 3 vote to fire you. This just happened to a very close colleague of mine, where the colleague formed a company, gave ownership to everybody, so everyone had equal ownership. And then 3 out of the 4 owners decided that the 4th one, who developed the whole thing in the first place, was not pulling their weight and decided to fire them. Okay, so, I mean, that's, you know, that can easily happen. So you have to be really careful that the only people that own it are the people who developed it and had equal status. That the percent of ownership is sort of lined up on percent of development, because otherwise you stand ready to lose the very thing that you developed. And I've seen this happen more than once, okay? Now, the next thing that you have to worry about is who's running the company. Once I gave my company to a nonprofit, I no longer owned it. Once I give it to a nonprofit, we got a board of directors. Do I have this down here? Yeah, go down. Managing the board of directors. So I quit owning the company because I gave it to a nonprofit called Marie Institute. So it didn't even sound like I was running it. Every single thing done was my stuff, and so what happened? We got a board of people that I thought I was very close to, actually, and I thought they'd be a very good board. However, the board then decided that other people would run it. And that, in fact, they then started saying things like, well, so-and-so really owns the company. We need to find out what she thinks. I said, what are you talking about? I developed the whole thing. So I ended up with a board that did not side with me in making decisions. And that also created all sorts of problems. It didn't ruin the country. It didn't ruin the company. I'll tell you why it didn't ruin it in a moment. It would have ruined it, but there are a few little problems that they didn't think of ahead of time. So you need to be very careful, particularly if you have a board. And if you're a nonprofit, you need to be careful because you need to recognize that legally in a nonprofit, the president of the nonprofit is running the company. In other words, you are no longer running it. If you make yourself president of the board, then you're running it. That's the only way you're running it. So you've got to put yourself in that position. You've got to be careful who you put in as president. Now, so what happened with me is once it became a nonprofit, I started gradually losing control. So you want to be careful. I'm not really saying you shouldn't have a nonprofit, but you have to set up a nonprofit in such a way that you've set yourself up as the president of the nonprofit. But it's the easiest way to lose control that I know of, because a board can vote out a president, if they want to. And so, okay. So you want to be careful about who owns it, who you set up as the owners in the first place. You want to be careful not to set up people out of guilt or not wanting to feel bad or thinking you should include everybody you know or things like that, because you need to recognize that you lose, the more owners you've got, the less control you've got. And you want to be careful who you have running the company in the same way. Now, the way I got back complete control of my company was when it came to money. Because as it turned out, I had a nonprofit, which I didn't own, but the nonprofit didn't always have enough money. And new companies in general don't always have enough money. And what I'm forever grateful for is I never gave them a penny. But I loaned them thousands, actually hundreds of thousands. I loaned them money all the time. What that ended up doing for them in the end was I could tell them they had to pay me back or give me the company. When I finally wanted to get back in control, I just said, you either pay me or you give me the company. Those are your options. Either one's fine with me. Since I knew they couldn't pay me, I knew they'd have to give me the company back, which is exactly what they did. And I got back in control. But the thing you have to understand is that companies need money to run. And when you've got a new company, you often cannot get enough money to run it at first without somebody investing something. And the only people usually who are going to invest are the people at the beginning, are the people who own the company. And when you try to get other people to invest, they're very likely to say, well, how much money have you invested? I have a brother who does this all the time. Just exactly what have you given, Marsha? I say, oh my gosh, my brother could fund my companies with 1/100th of what he's got. So you have to figure out where the money's going to come from. Now, this is where my not being a business person has really hurt me. Mainly because I have no concept of, I have an intellectual idea that it's a good thing to have alliances with other people who want to put money in. But I don't actually have any understanding how you do that, okay? And I don't know what's a good deal and what's a bad deal. I have a daughter who's got an MBA, but she herself teaches all over the place, and she's not the person who's going to run the show. And so this is when you had to be thinking about getting advisors. And so this is where I came to C4C, and I said, look, I need help in keeping my companies up and running. And so I need you to find somebody who could help me with this company. And that's when things started changing, because I got one advisor, and now I have a second advisor. And then these advisors have come in, and they say things like, now don't laugh. Even I find it hard not to laugh about this. So one of them says, well, do you have a business plan? I said, God, what a great idea. We should do that. Let's get a business plan. And then someone else comes in and says, well, I need this, this, and this. And one of the advisors says, well, how about if you make a list of what you need and when you're going to need it and how much it'll be? And then we'll look at it. And I said, fabulous idea. We're going to do that too. So in other words, you have to accept that you might not have been to business school. Okay? Now, I run a multi-million-dollar lab, so it's not like I can't manage money. But I've run a lab that does research, and I have to be good at managing research and managing a budget. But what no one ever taught me the slightest thing about to do is how to bring in players. In other words, the federal government's not going to fund my company like they fund my research, which means that I have to have other skills which no one taught me in graduate school, how you do that. So this is when you have to get advisors. And my advice, just go to C4C, because they have loads of advisors. Then they'll come talk to you. Of course, you sort of have to be slightly impressive or they won't come back. But if you can give them a story and have a passion, then it's possible they'll come back and help you out. And that's exactly what's happened to me. And the good thing is one of my advisors, and I don't know if my other advisor's here, one of them's here right now, so I'll probably introduce him to you. Not that I would let you take him away. And now we're looking at the whole concept of how to negotiate with other people. And are there other people who would want to invest in us, in what we're doing, and that would be financially viable for them and for us. And I think this requires, in effect, business skill and business understanding, and how to know who to trust and how to write a contract so that you actually don't lose a lot. So most of the mistakes I made along the way where I gave a lot away without a good contract to get it back. And my smartest move all along, and the only reason I really have companies is because I loaned all the money to the company, and I got everything back simply by calling in my loan. And that was a good move on my part. So, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. That's the comment that I'm making, which is you can see that you just got to be able to move and switch what you're doing all the time. Not give up on it. If you have a product, if you have something that the world will want or the world should want, now I have to just make one more thing, and then I will, maybe two more things and end. I forgot something, which is, obviously if you have something, you have to market it. In other words, having something does you no good if the world doesn't know about it. This was a huge mistake of my companies, mainly because I had two companies, behavioral tech and behavioral tech research. Behavioral tech research developed products, and we had another company who agreed to market it who didn't market. It turned out that there was nothing we could do to get them to market other than fire them and hire someone else. And that's always hard to do. But what I am going to tell you, my biggest mistake on marketing was to not track. So what happened was, this is just a good message to you, the National Institute of Mental Health refuses to give us funds any more money, because they said our products were not marketed well. So our whole emphasis now in the companies are to market, and go back to the government and say, okay, now we're ready for money. So I can't begin to tell you how important it is that if you've got a company, you have got to either hire someone who knows how to market, hire someone who knows how to market, or you've got to know how to market. But you can't expect that what academics usually do, which is go out and give talks and do your ordinary sort of stuff, is going to make whatever you've got be bought by everyone. And what happened to us was So, okay. Now, the managing of a board of directors and advisors, the point I was making is that I would really say that the key is not to invite all your friends and family, but to really look for very good people who have the criteria that your company needs. And to put yourself in a position where you can stay in control. And the problem in every single company I've had is I completely gave up control. I was constantly giving up control, not anything I would do again, but it was something I was. It's very easy as a professor to give up control of a company because it's easy to think that they know what they're doing and we don't. But in fact, it turns out we're not really completely brainless. Okay, staying out of trouble. The only other thing I have to say is once you have a company, first of all, you have all kinds of conflicts of interest that have to go on every single paper you ever present, every single talk you ever give, and you have to not forget to put all your conflicts up because it's really important. And it's very easy, if you haven't had conflicts on all your handouts, to not put them up. So that's one thing you've got to remember to do, or you'll get in big time trouble down the road. And the other thing you have to do is really remember to keep track of your time so that you're not now not working for the university anymore, but only working for your company. And that's very easy to do, particularly given that you have a lot of encouragement to be successful around here. And so you have to really pay a lot of attention to that. You have to pay a lot of attention to how you deal with your grad students so that they don't become your slaves that don't get money or benefits. And so I have found for myself personally, I think I live in the office where they work on conflicts of interest. I call them on everything. I send letters to them non-stop. They're my best friends. They tell me now, they say, Marsha, you have so many conflict of interest sets of rules now that we might not be able to make up any new ones for you. I say, oh, it's fine, I'm fine, I'll just keep calling you. You know, you're always better to be safe and call them and get a conflict of interest thing set up, particularly if you bring students or staff or colleagues at the university, colleagues that can take care of themselves, but staff or graduate students in, you've then got to have all kinds of conflicts of interest. And I have my students doing dissertations to develop computerized skills, which we have a lot of, I've developed a lot of skills. She and I are doing computerized skills training now. And so I have a whole conflict of interest, and I have the chair of the department as an overseer who meets with her regularly to make sure I'm not, ruining her life or tearing things away from her. So you have to remember that because it's really important. Amen. I probably made a lot more mistakes that I've forgotten, but you'll probably make the same, you'll make your own mistakes anyway. But the key is to just keep going. I can't believe myself that I still have these companies. I think that's my only claim to fame is that they actually still exist. Amen. Thank you. I think I take questions now, right? Okay. If there are questions, I'm willing to take them. Or comments. I'd be interested in comments too.
Can I ask the first question?
Yeah.
In your case, where you're offering the training, it's very close to, and it sort of comes out of the research in your lab, but I'm curious about any benefits you've seen back in your lab from being involved in disseminating your work through the training company.
Well, the huge benefit in my lab is all my students get hired now by people independent of me. My staff, all my research staff get hired independent of me. And when we go out training, we developed an experimental training group in my lab. And my experimental training group goes out and experiments with various ways to train. So that's been really exciting for the people in my lab since we try to make sure that what we do stays research. So we try to always evaluate, develop things, experiment with different ways of training. The training that we do, the other thing that's happened is that because they're using material copyrighted to me, money, instead of paying me for that, they now pay my lab money, and that's enough for one research assistant a year. And as you all know, how research assistants' money's gone way up. It's allowed me to accept a student that I might not have been able to accept because I get a research scientist. And then my Marie Institute is, so the key to helping my clinic has been the experimental training that we then get them to test also and try. our ability to evaluate the trainings that the training company has and feed that information back to us trying to make training better. And the other advantage is that it has brought money in that has supported a lot of people in my research clinic. Yeah.
What is your specialty within psychology?
My specialty is I'm a clinical psychologist now. I mean, I used to be a social psychologist, but now I'm a clinical psychologist, and my specialty is very high risk, multi-problem, impossible to treat. So I'm a behavioral treatment developer. So I develop behavioral interventions for severe disorders. People in prison. I mean, all the people you read about who are driving everybody else nuts, those are our people. That didn't sound too good, but it's true. Yeah.
What have you learned that when you're picking a business person to work with companies like essential qualities or if you think
How do I find a good business person?
What would your checklist be of qualities or experiences you think they would need based on, it sounds like you have business people work out really well and those not so well.
The people that have worked out well have been the people that have been vetted by C4C. I mean, to be honest with you, and the people who haven't been vetted for C4C, it turned out that we were not that skilled at picking them out. And so what I did was I went over and talked with Fiona and others about what my problems were and what I needed. And what I needed was people who, when they talked to me, I felt like they could believe in what I was doing, that they cared about what I was doing, that my mission could be a mission that they seemed very interested in. And I was looking, and all the people I got were successful themselves. So I've had people who, one of them is the head person now on a business consulting. If you need a name, I've got a great person for you because he's easing out of us. And so he ran that kind of a company, and another person was an executive who's sitting right over here, an executive at Boeing, and then has a company designed to help small companies that are doing good for the world. So to me, the idea was to make sure first of all, it had to be someone who liked me, that interpersonally seemed to like me, and that wanted me, not just my company, but wanted me to do well. Because when you're the person who's developed something, you've got to have somebody who believes in you and what you're doing. That will help you be better at what you're doing. I didn't want someone who could see that someone else was great, but not me, because I don't want to lose complete control of my company once more. So one thing is to be sure they believe in you. And people are clear about that, I think. Either they do or they don't come across as they do. And second, that they've got the business experience you need. And third, my rule about people is love me, love the people I love. So our first consultant loved me, but not the people I loved, and didn't treat the staff well, and that was the end of that person. I mean, that person was gone very quickly. I mean, you remember, you can get rid of people. And so you want to be sure they're going to be really good to your staff, because just being good to you is not sufficient. Yeah?
How do you stay ahead or even stay even with the competition, especially since you said people are out there using your materials?
This is our tragedy at the moment, okay? Why? All the people competing with us are people I've trained. So the people in my company keep saying, quit saying they're good, Marsha. And I said, what are you talking about? Of course they're good. I train them. And they not only that, but they advertise trained by me. So we're at a point now where I'm sure we need Stephen Jones, by the way, to come in and be here with us spiritually, because we need to reinvent ourselves. Because we now have managed to develop something that other people can now do without our overhead, mainly because they sell themselves. So for example, we have a workshop that we have done every year for 15 years or something for X price from us. One of our former trainers by himself now, not a company, is doing it for $500 less 2 weeks before or after, I forget, us. So there's no way to compete with us on the same terms. So we're actually moving into this, what do we have to offer now? And I think it's probably true of all companies that, you look at all the iPhone companies and all these companies, all these companies have to reinvent themselves. And I don't think, this is where being a business person is really probably helpful, because I reinvent research, but I've never tried to reinvent a company. But I'm sure that's what we need to do. But I can't tell you how to do it, but when I do it, I'll let you know. Well, when we do it. Yeah, back here, in the blonde.
I was just wondering, in the beginning process, how did you manage, like, UW resources versus, not balancing the conflicts, I guess, with your student and the work that they were doing, maybe for outside work versus inside work? And then also pricing, like, how do you, maybe C4C, I guess they didn't exist then, but now would help with the determining how to make your company grow and price your services.
The way I've dealt with conflicts of interest, one, I bought printers at my own cost, computers at my own cost, and put them in my office. I have an executive secretary who doesn't work 100% time, and I pay her for every letter, every call, every single thing that happens is paid by me. So I have always simply paid people, and I've paid everyone a monthly amount of money that I've said, if you're doing this off of the work that you're doing for me personally. And I make sure that I pay sufficiently so that no one will say that I was using staff people at my lab. Okay, so that's the first. And I bought printers, I bought paper. I make sure I always have paper that I've bought, the printer that I've bought, computers that I've bought. I'm obsessive about this. Because I don't want to get accused of anything and then try to defend myself on the front page of the Seattle Times. So I think you're just smarter to buy things and provide these things and then use them. Now, some things you can use. I mean, you can use email. You have to read all those rules and follow them religiously. And this is when it's really good to have someone in your lab that actually cares that you're keeping those rules. I happen to have someone who's just beyond distressed if she thinks I'm breaking them. And I say, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. Because it's so easy to slip out of these rules without any intention to slip out. But it's just very easy to slip out. So that's why I make sure I pay a lot of people extra, a couple $100 a month, for example, because they don't do that much for me. But it's just to make sure if I get them to phone for me, I want to be sure I'm paying them. So there's that. Now on pricing, we just looked around what everybody else priced when we started. But there was no one doing what I was doing. So we looked at what other people who do similar stuff do, and then we priced it that way. We're now in a position where we're being undercut across the board by people with no overhead. It's non-companies. So I'm not sure, what we're going to do. That said, an entrepreneur in Australia just marketed me for about almost 100 times more than I get marketed for here. I mean, for an astronomical amount of money, which is the only reason I went. And so the facts are, there are ways to do this, but this is not my long suit. My problem in my company is they say all the time is I give everything away. I constantly give, I'm not good at not giving things away. So get this is where it's wise to get a consultant. If you think your company's going to be a success, talk to a C4C, get a consultant, and get a market analysis. Because a lot of things, we try to market when we don't have a market analysis, and then we wonder why we failed. It's very easy. Someone else in your line had a question? Yeah.
You had mentioned that marketing was a key challenge, and how are you working on that now? The way we market it, it's not that we didn't make money. We made in the millions, actually. But it's just that millions aren't as much in business as they are in a little academic research clinic. But the way we did it was when we marketed one thing, like our training, we marketed everything else. So we bundled. We did a lot of bundling. We marketed one thing, we bundled the next thing with it. So bundling is good. But I think now, as I look at it, I think that the advertising our company did is really 1950s. And a lot of other things are like that. And so I guess what I would say is, had I stopped my job over here and gone over there and said we have to market, I would have probably gone to social psychology people and people like that and said, how do you market this? What's the research on it and how do you do it? In other words, if it was an academic job of mine, I would have been a researcher, found out how to do it, and probably been able to do it. But over here, my research hat was not on. I had my business hat over there, so I never did that. Not that I think was the big mistake, was that I didn't really let my research self show up over there. So I think either getting a good marketing company or most of us are good researchers ourselves, and we can find the research on it. So I just want to introduce Preston.
Oh, right.
Just so you know who he is, Preston, if you would stand up. So this is the guy that's the one who said maybe we should have a business plan. And then he said, why don't you just count up what you need and tell me what you need before we get it for you? And I thought that was a good idea. And then my president of our company, which is, would you stand up? Andrei Ivanov, who's a professor at Columbia. So she flies here almost every other week and is a full professor at Columbia University also, but she's president. And she's a former student, and that was a smart move on my part. Okay, so y'all can talk to them too, because they know all about all the trials and tribulations, and they've sat through all the mistakes, except for my advisor who's solving all my mistakes. Okay.
Thanks, Marsha, for talking.